The British political establishment just witnessed something they never saw coming. Moments ago, inside the halls of Westminster, Keir Starmer's composure completely shattered on live television. What triggered this unprecedented meltdown? Nigel Farage and his Reform Party just dropped a bombshell so massive, so politically devastating, that it's sending shockwaves through every corner of UK politics. The polls are going wild, the media is scrambling, and the Labour government's grip on power suddenly looks a lot less secure than it did this morning. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about the current state of British democracy. This isn't just another political squabble. This is a full-blown earthquake that's ripping apart the foundations of the two-party system that's dominated Britain for over a century. Stay with me, because what happened in the last 60 minutes is already being called the most significant political moment of 2026. The cameras were rolling during Prime Minister's questions when it happened. Keir Starmer stood at the dispatch box attempting to defend his government's latest policy failures, when Nigel Farage rose from his seat with that characteristic smirk that's become his political trademark. The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew something big was coming. Farage didn't waste a single second. He revealed polling data that the mainstream media had been deliberately suppressing for weeks. Reform UK has now surged to unprecedented levels, sitting at 32% in the latest surveys. But here's where it gets absolutely explosive. Labour has collapsed to just 26%. The Conservative Party, they're languishing in third place at 21%. These aren't marginal shifts or statistical noise. This is a complete realignment of British politics happening in real time right before our eyes. The significance cannot be overstated. For the first time since modern polling began, a party outside the traditional two-party system is leading nationwide. Starmer's face told the entire story. The colour drained from his cheeks. His hands gripped the dispatch box so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He tried to respond, but his voice cracked. The words came out jumbled, defensive, almost desperate. This wasn't the calm, collected lawyer-turned-politician that Labour had marketed to the British people. This was a man watching his political legacy crumble in real time. The Labour benches behind him sat in stunned silence. No cheering, no rallying cries, just the hollow realisation that their government might be living on borrowed time. But the polling numbers only tell part of this extraordinary story. What Farage revealed next sent absolute shockwaves through Westminster. Reform UK has secured a massive financial backing from a coalition of British business leaders who have completely lost faith in both Labour and the Conservatives. We're talking about hundreds of millions of pounds in committed funding for the next general election campaign. This isn't just grassroots momentum anymore. This is institutional support at a level that rivals anything the establishment parties can muster. The business community, traditionally split between Labour and the Tories, has made a calculated decision. They're looking at Starmer's economic policies, seeing chaos and uncertainty, and they're jumping ship to a party that didn't even exist in its current form a few years ago. The symbolism is staggering. These are CEOs, entrepreneurs and industry leaders who would normally never touch a populist party like Reform. But desperation changes everything. Britain's economy is struggling. Growth is stagnant. Inflation keeps creeping back. Business confidence has hit rock bottom. And the political class seems completely disconnected from the reality facing ordinary people and job creators alike. Farage positioned himself as the only leader willing to make the tough decisions that everyone else is too politically afraid to consider. Lower taxes, massive deregulation, a complete overhaul of the immigration system, an end to what he calls the suffocating bureaucracy that's strangling British competitiveness. The Labour backbenchers started shouting, trying to drown out Farage's presentation, but that only made things worse for Starmer. The Speaker had to call for order multiple times. The whole scene devolved into absolute chaos. Meanwhile, Farage just stood there, completely calm, letting the pandemonium unfold around him. He knows exactly what he's doing. Every outburst from Labour MPs, every desperate attempt to shut him down only reinforces his narrative that the establishment is terrified of reform because they represent genuine change. The optics couldn't be worse for the Prime Minister. Here's Starmer, the man who promised to restore dignity and competence to British politics. presiding over a parliament that looks more like a shouting match at a local council meeting. And here's Farage, the insurgent outsider, appearing more prime ministerial than the actual prime minister. It's a devastating contrast, and everyone watching at home can see it crystal clear. Social media exploded within minutes. The hashtag started trending immediately. Videos of Starmer's reaction went viral across every platform. The commentary was brutal and unforgiving. Even people who've never supported Farage admitted that he'd completely outmanoeuvred the government. Political analysts who dismissed reform as a flash-in-the-pan protest movement are now rushing to revise their forecasts. The question is no longer whether reform can win seats. The question is whether they can actually win power. The timing of this revelation is absolutely crucial to understanding its impact. Labour has been in government for less than 2 years, and already the cracks are showing everywhere you look. The NHS waiting lists keep getting longer despite billions in additional funding. The cost of living crisis hasn't improved. Crime rates in major cities continue rising. Small businesses are closing at alarming rates. The British public is frustrated, angry, and increasingly willing to take a chance on something radically different. Starmer came into office promising steady, sensible governance after years of Conservative chaos. But what voters are experiencing doesn't feel steady or sensible. It feels like more of the same bureaucratic incompetence with a different party label attached. Farage understands this frustration at a visceral level. He's built his entire political career on channeling public anger at the establishment. Brexit was his masterpiece, the moment he proved that the supposedly impossible could become reality if you tap into the right emotions at the right time. Now he's attempting to pull off an even bigger upset. He wants to shatter the two-party system entirely and install himself at the heart of British power. 5 years ago, this would have seemed like an absurd fantasy. Today, it's looking more plausible with each passing week. The reform surge isn't happening in isolation. Across Europe, populist movements are gaining ground. Traditional centre-left and centre-right parties are hemorrhaging support. Voters are demanding leaders who speak plainly, who acknowledge their concerns without condescension, who promise to put national interests first without apology. What makes this moment even more dramatic is the context of Starmer's leadership style. He's never been a natural communicator or a charismatic presence. His strength was supposed to be competence, legal precision, managerial expertise. But when you're facing a political insurgency led by one of the most effective communicators in modern British politics, competence alone doesn't cut it. Farage can distill complex policy positions into sound bites that resonate with millions. He can turn a parliamentary exchange into a viral moment that dominates the news cycle for days. Starmer, by contrast, tends to speak in cautious, qualified statements that satisfy lawyers but bore normal people. The contrast has never been more apparent than it was during this extraordinary exchange. While Starmer stammered through his response, Farage was already moving to his second bombshell announcement. Reform UK has finalised candidate selections for every single constituency in England, Wales and Scotland. They're running a full slate. This isn't a limited campaign focused on target seats. This is a comprehensive national operation designed to compete everywhere simultaneously. The resources required for such an undertaking are enormous. The fact that Reform can pull this off demonstrates how dramatically the political landscape has shifted. Just 2 years ago, they were a fringe party with a handful of MPPs now they're positioned to mount the most serious third-party challenge in British electoral history. The implications for the next general election are staggering. Under Britain's first-past-the-post system, even a modest Reform performance could trigger chaos. If they're genuinely polling at 32%, they could win dozens of seats, potentially denying any party an outright majority. But if they continue climbing and Labour continues falling, we could be looking at something unprecedented: a Reform government. Prime Minister Nigel Farage. These phrases would have been punchlines to a joke just months ago. Today, serious political strategists are gaming out exactly how it could happen. The pathway isn't even that complicated. Reform needs to hold their current support and pick up a few more points from disillusioned Conservatives. Labour needs to continue alienating voters with unpopular policies and uninspiring leadership. The Liberal Democrats and other smaller parties need to stay fragmented and irrelevant. If those conditions hold through to the next election, the mathematics start working in Reform's favour. They could win a plurality of seats and form a government either alone or in coalition with what's left of the Conservative Party. That scenario would have seemed like science fiction at the start of this parliament. Now it's being discussed openly by everyone from betting markets to academic forecasters. Starmer knows this. You could see it written across his face during that exchange. He's not just defending his government's current record, he's fighting for political survival. The policy differences between Labour and Reform couldn't be starker, and that's exactly what makes this moment so pivotal for Britain's future direction. Starmer represents continuity with the post-war consensus, managed decline, high taxes, extensive regulation, close alignment with European norms even after Brexit, progressive social policies and a cautious approach to immigration reform. Farage represents a complete break with that tradition. He wants radical tax cuts, aggressive deregulation, a hard line on immigration that makes previous Conservative policies look permissive, a bonfire of environmental regulations that he claims are destroying British industry, and a foreign policy that prioritises bilateral deals with the United States and Commonwealth nations over any relationship with Brussels. These aren't minor disagreements around the edges. This is a fundamental clash of visions about what Britain should be in the 21st century, and the British public gets to decide which vision they prefer. The polling suggests they're increasingly leaning toward Farage's vision. Even if they have reservations about the man himself, that's perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Reform's rise. Farage remains a polarising figure. Millions of Britons genuinely despise him and everything he represents, but millions of others see him as the only politician willing to speak uncomfortable truths and challenge the failing status quo. The latter group is apparently growing faster than the former group is mobilising. The media response to this parliamentary showdown has been fascinating to watch unfold. The traditional broadcasters tried to downplay the significance initially. They focused on Starmer's policy announcements and treated Farage's intervention as a sideshow. But social media had other ideas. Clips of Starmer's visible distress spread instantly. Commentary and analysis poured in from every direction. By evening, even the mainstream outlets had to acknowledge that something genuinely significant had occurred. The front pages the next morning told the story. Several papers led with variations of Starmer rattled as Reform surges. Others went even further, openly speculating about whether Labour could lose the next election to Farage. The editorial pages were equally dramatic. Some columnists expressed horror at the prospect of a Reform government and called on Labour to get its act together immediately. Others suggested that the political establishment had brought this on themselves through years of ignoring public concerns about immigration, sovereignty and economic stagnation. A few brave souls even admitted that Farage might be exactly what Britain needs to break out of its current malaise. The range of reactions demonstrates how deeply divided the country has become. There's no consensus about whether Reform's rise represents a democratic renaissance or a dangerous lurch toward populist extremism. That ambiguity is precisely what makes this such a compelling political moment. The outcome isn't predetermined. The next few months will determine whether Reform's momentum continues or whether Labour can somehow right the ship. Starmer's team went into damage control mode immediately after the parliamentary session ended. Briefings went out to friendly journalists emphasising Labour's achievements and dismissing the polls as temporary blips. Cabinet ministers hit the airwaves defending the Prime Minister and attacking Farage's credibility. The party machine mobilised its activist base to flood social media with pro-Labour content, but all of this felt reactive and desperate rather than confident and commanding. When you're the governing party and you're responding defensively to an opposition party's narrative, you've already lost the communications battle. Farage, meanwhile, didn't need to do much of anything. The story was running itself. He gave a few carefully calibrated interviews where he positioned himself as the reasonable alternative to a failing government. He avoided the inflammatory rhetoric that sometimes gets him into trouble and instead focused on kitchen table economic issues that resonate with swing voters. It was a masterclass in political discipline from a man often criticised for lacking exactly that quality. Perhaps he's learning, perhaps he understands that he's closer to real power than ever before and he can't afford to make unforced errors. Or perhaps his advisors have finally convinced him that prime ministers can't indulge in the same provocations that work for insurgent campaigners. Whatever the reason, this version of Farage is more dangerous to the establishment than any previous iteration. He's combining his natural communication gifts with strategic restraint and professional campaign infrastructure. That's a potent combination.